As so often happens with Scripture, we tend to glide over the surface of this strange little story, smoothing out the rough corners, spackling over the cracks, taping together the jagged edges that don't quite meet, believing that because it is familiar and known, we have it all figured out. But all of the spackle in the hardware store can't hide the fact that this is a strange little story. On the surface, Martha, the older sister, is busy with many things, distracted, flustered, on edge from hosting Jesus and his disciples, perhaps more than a bit jealous of Mary, who leaves her with the dishes and the dust bunnies while she sits at the feet of the master. Martha has even become kind of a byword for someone who's a little too busy for her own good, someone who's busy and never lets you forget it, someone who volunteers to take on more and more and more and then wants to volunteer you too. As one preacher said, Martha is a woman who interrupted Jesus to talk about chores. Teachings on this passage often focus on the tension between two approaches to discipleship, such as living a Mary life in a Martha world, the practical life of service versus the spiritual life of contemplation, to do or to be. Or discussions play into subtle and sometimes not so subtle stereotypes and tropes about feminine jealousy, womanly meddling, girlish dysfunction, the jealous sister, competition among church ladies, the right attitude for women's service. Often, exegesis of this passage proposes the rather obvious insight that we are called to be both Martha and Mary. We are called to integrate listening and doing, action and contemplation. And the trick is to find the balance between the busy Martha and the contemplative Mary that lie within each of us. Martha and Mary have even been seen as icons or models of the pilgrim and the heavenly church, the church militant and the church triumphant. On earth, we live as Martha, the pilgrim church, but we strive for the heavenly church to come, as typified by Mary. There's nothing wrong with these interpretations, except for the blatantly condescending ones, and much to be said for those that urge us to balance the tension between action and reflection and being and doing. But is it really that simple? I wonder. Scripture is seldom so simple and one-dimensional. Stories in Scripture often need to be turned sideways and even upside down to make sense. And even the most straightforward teachings of Jesus are rich and complex, filled with invitation and challenge and surprise. This particular story has many textual variants, and there are verbs that can be translated more than one way, ways that change the meaning of the passage. And there are disconnects that are not easy to explain away. Why are Martha's actions unsatisfactory? In his own ministry, Jesus emphasized feeding people, welcoming people in, providing wine and bread and fish, dining, offering radical hospitality to the point where he and his disciples were criticized for it. Why is Martha criticized for doing what Jesus himself urged? Even the interpretation that we should strive for balance between contemplation and action is puzzling, since in this passage, these actions are seen as mutually exclusive, with one option being approved and the other rejected. Is this, as many say, a cautionary tale about the spiritual danger of busyness severed from prayer? Or is it not really about Martha at all, but an affirmation of women's discipleship and study, a formal blessing for women like Mary and like us who choose to sit at the Master's feet? If so, why the dialogue with Martha at all? Is this the narration of an event in the life of Jesus presented as it happened? Or is it, as scripture scholars Fiorenza and Reed suggest, an incident that has been filtered and sifted and reimagined and shared through the lens of Luke's early Christian community? a community that may have been struggling to discern and define and redefine women's roles in leadership and study and diaconia service. The text itself does not explicitly refer to a meal, and it does not place Martha in the kitchen or behind a broom. That's our own story. Those are our own images and our own assumptions. The text, in fact, uses the word diaconia for Martha's work, a word that Luke uses 8 times. Diakoneo can mean waiting upon, supporting, doing the work, preparation. It can mean many things, and among them, ministry in the name of the church. Is it possible that Martha's distress does not originate in cooking and cleaning and being relegated to the kitchen, but in something deeper? Martha's state of mind is typically translated as busy, distracted, overburdened. But the verb here can also commonly be translated as pulling away, being dragged away. Does Martha's frustration emerge from a pain over a pulling away or a dragging away of her place in ministry? Is this passage a remnant, a lingering post-resurrection memory from a community that tamed the diaconal ministry of women while advocating for a more traditional feminine role? Is Martha a cautionary tale for the overwhelmed? Or do we hear in her the anguished voice of a woman who sees her role and ministerial responsibilities slipping away, pulled away, diminished, dismissed, calling upon her sister in ministry to come to her support? And Mary, is Mary the model of a bold disciple claiming her space among the men, or is she a figure that illustrates the importance of women keeping silence? I don't know. And none of the brilliant scholars who study this story know either. All we can do is view Martha and Mary and Jesus through the eyes of faith and through the crucible of our own experience and reflect on the possibilities, knowing that Jesus is with us in that reflection. We can embrace and emulate the sisters' close relationship with Jesus, a friendship so deep that they trusted him with their anger, with their silence, with their choices. And we know that later they trusted him even unto death, as he called their beloved brother Lazarus to exit the tomb. We can give thanks for their courage in following Jesus. We know that Martha and Mary, like all of the other women we meet in Scripture, lived lives of boldness, whatever else the world may say about them. They sat at his feet like Mary. They served like Martha. They said yes, like Our Lady. They argued for inclusion, like the Syrophoenician woman. They brought their friends to meet Jesus, like the woman at the well. They offered financial support for mission, like Joanna. They led house churches like Phoebe. They evangelized like Priscilla. They sang of justice and walked in faith and dreamed of a new and transformed world enlightened by the light of Christ. What is the truth about Martha and Mary? For me, it is enough to know that their faithfulness and their commitment to love and to serve, and yes, to lead, is our inheritance, yours and mine, passed down from mother to daughter, from sister to sister, disciple to disciple, woman of faith to woman in faith, down through the ages, whatever our station, whatever our circumstances, whatever our choice to respond to God's call. Martha is honored as the patron saint of servants and cooks, housewives, butlers, housemaids, laundry workers, innkeepers, and that is no surprise. But if you study medieval paintings of Martha, paintings from Italy and France and Germany from the 13th to the 16th century, you will see something else altogether, something unexpected, something bold, something that turns our vision of Martha upside down and sideways. These artists portray Martha as a dragon slayer, the feminine version of St. George. Legend tells us that Martha subdued a wild creature terrorizing the countryside, conquering it by a cross and some holy water and her own fierce and unflagging courage. Martha and Mary, sisters in faith, homemaker, disciples, student, slayer of dragons, choosing Jesus, choosing faith, choosing the better part.